I had this interesting thing. I was addressing a Christian group that came to Israel, and the head of the group, the pastor, was a man I literally love. I love him. He's one of the most beautiful neshamas, the most beautiful souls that I've ever met. Um, and so someone asked us something like, okay, so he doesn't accept Jesus. And so he turns to me, he's like, so what about you? How do you feel about that? I'm like, I hope that in Olam Haba, in the world to come, we'll be hanging out together just like in this world. And so then they said, and what about you, Pastor? And he said, well, I'm hoping that when the Messiah finally reappears, that my dear, dear friend Eliyahu will accept Jesus. And I'm thinking to myself, that's not what I wanted to hear.
Right.
It was
for
a
Adam,
really
that's not what
hard
you
one
want to
for
hear.
me. It was
Correct.
a really difficult one.
It's extremely difficult. And again, Adam, this is like, I'm really happy that you're in the conversation and that you're writing about the conversation. But what I've learned over the years, in over 20 years of doing this, is at the end, there is going to be a certain sense of mystery. That if you're truly about the relationship in Jewish-Christian relations, you have to make space for mystery. It's a mystery for me that Christians really think about Israel, willing to pray about Israel, willing to sow into Israeli causes, willing to even come to Israel, because the city of the hill has been so put into a allegory that there's no significance to the geographic location. It's really a miracle that 1.5 million Christians actually end up here in tourism numbers. Because statistically, again, 2.4 billion and only 1.5 million make it here. If you had a chart, there would be nothing going up in the chart. It would still be that flat line. But it's so significant in my point of view. So I have to rely on a certain amount of mystery, despite the institutionalized Christian anti-Semitism that really influenced many Christians today. For a Christian to actually say yes to this whole calling, wherever they are in their journey with God, for me, in this, again, I'm speaking for myself, I have to sort of allow that to be what it is. And if I can be of some source to nurture that, great. But at the same time, the Christian, if they're starting to move from Christian support for Israel to Jewish-Christian relations, part of that journey has to take in consideration the training, the history, and the understanding of the sensitivity of what it means when we are sharing with one another, and having a frank discussion, but understanding, because I don't accept the way you're presenting your faith to me, means somehow that it has to end up like a Martin Luther moment. Because Martin Luther was very enthusiastic at one point in time on his way of looking at Christianity. And when the Jews said no, not only did he write Table Talks, which is really an unbelievable anti-Semitic book, but one of the last dying words of Martin Luther was, get the Jews out of Germany. Okay? So the rejection of Martin Luther's version of Christianity ended up really bad for the Jewish people. So I'm hoping that when Christians are moving from Christian support for Israel to Jewish-Christian relations, our no doesn't end up like a Martin Luther moment.
Your mentioning of mystery, really resonates with me. My own personal experience over the last 7 years that I've been writing and 4,000 articles, and I don't mean to boast. Well, maybe I do, because I love that. But you mentioned when Christians come to Israel, if they see what they expected to see, then they didn't have open eyes, because something's happening here that's unprecedented and it's very unusual. And we need a real meeting. We need a real relationship, a significant relationship that deals not just in interfaith, kumbaya, let's all drink a Pepsi and that. We need a real relationship. And in a real relationship, there's contact, and both sides are changed, and both sides might be a little uncomfortable, and that's why they change. So yeah, and and there's so many reasons for this thing to happen. Like you were talking about the common Bible. I love that phrase. It's stunning when you think about it, that there's a major religion that dwarfs Judaism that learns Torah.
I would even go further. I would give further. I would say that to have the book of Esther in their canon is truly miraculous. Because if you want to talk about Jewish hope, where in our fluidity of Tanakh, you know this because we have this debate in the Talmud, Esther wasn't really going to make it in.
Right.
And we were nervous because of Jewish hope. And remember, we have the Roman Empire on top of us persecuting us, and Jewish hope doesn't work well with the Romans. So we were debating based upon the political moment whether Esther should be in. But right from the beginning, the book of Esther was one of those books that really should have never been in, because it looks like a real Jewish story. And the early church fathers were debating whether to actually have Esther. And Martin Luther definitely didn't want Esther. And what's incredible in the journey of all of this is that the second most quoted verse for Christians who have a heart for Israel is Esther 4:14, a time such as this. That Christians are basically saying,
really?
The number one verse you already know is Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. I will bless those who will bless thee, and they want to be a blessing to Israel. But the second most quoted verse is Esther 4:14. So here's a book that was never supposed to be in the Christian canon to begin with, ends up as one of the fundamental Hebrew Bible verses for support of Israel. That basically they're saying, I'm your Esther in moments of crisis.
I can't even begin to wrap my head around that.
But that's a fact. That's the fact. That's
huge.
It's huge. Theologically, remember, you can't reduce what's happening here to a bumper sticker moment.
No.
I don't like bumper sticker religion.
And it is not interfaith.
It's not interfaith. This is very much, again, this is why you have to have a certain sense of mystery. And that's why it's hard for me now to think in terms of prepackaged Christians to have a relationship with. How can I explain that they're quoting Esther 4:14? Do they know the history of their own movement towards Esther? And you're quoting this book and you're saying you're my Esther? Like there's no precedent in Jewish history that a Christian would come side by side with a Jew and quote Esther 4:14. There's nothing in history like that. So that's why I think this when we're talking about what happened at the Davidson Center this past Sunday, and you have Orthodox Jews protesting the way they protested, they truly do not understand Christians at all.
True.
Most Israelis, their only education, if they get this, about Christianity is the persecution of Christians, of Jews. This is in the high school curriculum. There is no...
I grew up in North Jersey.
Believe me, in North Jersey, but I'm talking about Israelis.
The only thing I knew about Christianity was Christmas trees. That's all I knew.
Okay, but I'm telling you about the Israeli educational system.
It's even worse.
It's even worse because it ends off in a negative. So if I end off with a negative, and then I know the institutional memory, and then I have a few hundred people coming and praying for my soul, well, what's going to be the reaction? Well, the reaction is going to be that people are going to be very angry. All right. But I would have expected somebody as an elected official, a deputy mayor, whose city has benefited so much from Christian support for Israel. The Jerusalem Foundation that serves as the nonprofit for many of the things that are happening in Jerusalem. How many Christians have done so much for Jerusalem that he goes ahead as a representative of the city and stokes the fire the way he did and causes a desanctification of God's name? These Christians don't understand what king is doing, what some of these rabbis are doing. They just have this medieval understanding of Christianity. So if I go ahead and I just point in the most controversial thing about that prayer group, which is their prayer for Jews to accept Jesus, and I ignore everything else what the Christians are doing, it's easy to go ahead and stoke fires on what we disagree upon and get the crowd into a frenzy and then actually intimidate those people who don't understand what's going on. Some of the people I spoke to at that event, just like, why are you hating me? You don't even know me.
Right. Okay, David, I have to cut this short. Or long, whichever way it was. I said it's been about an hour, and which, I mean, I clearly could sit and at your feet and learn for another several hours. I learned more from disagreeing with you than I learned from agreeing with most everyone else. I want to leave one clear message that I in no way condone or identify with the very unfriendly protest of Christians praying for Israel and Jerusalem. Though I do understand it, and I'm hoping that through understanding we can start building bridges towards each other and fixing old wounds. I hope so. David, thanks so much. If this is interesting to you, leave comments and ask for David again, and we'll try this again if David has enough patience for me. Thank you so much, everyone. Be blessed, and be blessed from Israel.